Dr. Abelson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
You've been in this industry for a while, ever since the iPhone was launched in 2007.
That was like yesterday. I've been here at MIT doing MIT education and computing since 1970.
That is fantastic. The industry has changed so much within
Absolutely.
that period. That's like 54 years now.
Yeah, so I don't think about the iPhone as a thing that's been around for a long time.
For sure. And then there's so much that's happened in between,
Oh, yes.
all the way up to
It's just amazing.
computers becoming mainstream, getting in the house,
Oh,
to the point where we have the iPhone, and then now we have AI, and then AI is now becoming mainstream and getting into everyone's
yes,
phone.
that's really amazing that's happening.
Yeah.
Of course, AI, the idea of AI got invented in the late 1950s. And then there was a period where there was a lot of research here at MIT. And then what happened is there was a lot of promises about it. Initially, there was all this AI was going to do all this wonderful, wonderful stuff. And it just turned out to be a harder problem than people thought. And then people there was no real impact what was happening, except in, research labs like MIT. But there was a tremendous lack of interest in this. And that's what people nowadays called the AI winter.
Right.
So there just wasn't a lot of interest. And then, that sort of changed even about, 4 or 5 years ago. And now suddenly it's coming back even much greater than people even anticipated, because I think, as you just indicated, it's something that can be used by everyone. And that's the difference. So it's not merely there's a technology that, the industries can use or people can make companies, but suddenly people can start having personal interactions with it. And that has just been enormous. And it's still going on.
Yes. That's fantastic. And you brought up this point of people making AI is now accessible. People can use it. It's in the hands of people.
Absolutely.
And I want to take you back to this moment in 2007 when the iPhone came out.
Yep.
And then in 2010 when the App Store was in.
Yes.
And then Google, you and Google, started working on the App Inventor project.
Yeah, and that was almost a direct reaction to the iPhone coming out.
Yes.
Because remember, that was right when Google started Android. So there was, I don't know if Google wants to admit it, but there was a lot of sense, oh God, Apple's coming out with the iPhone and all of these things. What does Google have? So that was kind of the genesis of the Android project, even though there was a lot of stuff going on before that.
Right.
But that was, again, the time when there was really, really big excitement. It's just hard to overestimate how people underestimated how that would do. I mean, I remember at one internal meeting, and I don't quite remember the date it was, when they sort of asked the Android group, what are your eventual hopes for how many people would use Android? And the people running that said, oh gosh, we can imagine 1 billion people using it. And everybody else sort of said, what do you mean by that? How could that ever be? Aren't you just being wildly overambitious and things? And now that's where we are.
Right.
So it's...
That's fantastic. And you came in at this moment, where the App Store really was the catalyst of the smartphone revolution, putting the apps in.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's what really that's what made smartphones mainstream. And now we're at this moment where OpenAI is doing custom GPTs, if you will, and people can sort of build these GPT apps. What do you think about that? Do you think that's a parallel to the past?
Oh, I mean, what you're doing is this is now turning into a foundation kind of technology where people can build all sorts of things on top of that. So, people talk about OpenAI because right now they're the most successful and the most impactful. But there's a lot of other companies who are saying we want to follow that model. Any company you start, if you have some special expertise, well, why do you not want to do that with a large language model? And why do you not want to do that where you make your own personalized large language model that does these things? So I don't think it's going to slow down. Mm-hmm. I mean, because it's just going to become people, I don't know, they're going to say, oh yeah, I've got a product. Well, of course, the interface to it is going to be a large language model.
Right.
Absolutely, of course. So that's just going to keep expanding.
And you mentioned these other companies like there's Anthropic with the Claude suite of products.
Right. There's Anthropic, there's Meta, there's, Google's doing stuff. Everybody's is sort of saying that's kind of the way, what do I want to say? If I'm making a product that has an interface,
yes,
why would you not want that interface to be backed by a large language model?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So in this space, where we're changing the way interfaces are made, where we're changing the way people interact with AI, phones, models, where do you see the space going in the next 12 months? How do you see things changing from this point on?
Oh, God. I've gotten to the point where you can't even predict what happens next month.
Right.
Okay, so if I said, can people generate images? And can we make an interface that naturally generates images as part of what it's doing? And I asked you this 2 years ago. You would have said, well, maybe we can do that and maybe you can do it, but it's kind of difficult. And now it's absolutely standard. So I'll ask you the same question. At the same point, do you want to make an interface that, for your company, that automatically responds to what you say by video, by synthesized, generated video, where you say, my product is really about people eating coconuts on the beach, and I really want to have some video that does that by people who are eating coconuts and the weather's good and all of that thing, and I just say that. And now suddenly it's generating a video that does that. Okay, we can't do that standard quite yet, but is someone going to say we couldn't be doing that in 6 months? And you're asking me what's going on in 2 years? So the other evolution that's happening is this stuff integrating with physical devices and sensors. So again, we're surrounded, people think about phones and browsers and all this stuff, but we're surrounded by all of this technology.
Right.
That's both activators and sensors from everything going on.
Right.
My God, opening the door, right? It sounds like sarcasm. Why? It's like from the Hitchhiker's Guide from the Galaxy, if you know that thing,
yes,
where the guy starts arguing with the door. Okay, well, why not?
Yeah.
Why? Don't you think that'll be standard
right,
in a year? But think about every device that's around and everything that's around, and that as part of some sort of, intelligent AI kind of thing that you can interact with. Okay, so maybe that's a little exaggerated for right now, but I bet there are companies that are developing this stuff right now.
Yes.
And if you ask me about 2 years, well, why not? So it's just really incredibly hard to predict.
That's so true. And that you've painted a vivid picture here. We have devices, we have novel interfaces, we have innovations with video, text,
right,
you name it. And you've been for a long while in the AI for education space, innovation in that space.
Since 1970, actually.
Yes, yeah, and you've really, I think education is a core thing, even today, and it will always be a core thing. Where do you see, AI making the most significant impact on education, in the short term?
God, that's just so hard. People are very nervous about it.
Yes.
Because on the one hand, people are saying AI is going to be credible. It's going to empower everybody and do all sorts of things. And on the other side, you see people are saying AI is this tremendous risk. It's going to put teachers out of business and things. And right now, I'd say the jury's still out. A couple of obvious things. One obvious thing is we need much, much better teacher education and teacher exposure to that. So people are realizing that now, but it's not mainstream and it's not recognized. So one of the real things that has to happen in AI fulfilling its potential in education is tremendous work with teacher education and training.
Yes.
So that, although very little is known about this thing, that's known. That's sort of obvious. So I see that going. But the other side of it really empowers kids. That a lot of what do I want to say? We're talking about how AI makes it easy for everyone.
Yes.
Well, everyone includes kids.
Yes, of course.
So,
Absolutely.
the project we run at MIT makes things where we're doing a lot of work with middle school students. They have their own image for what should be cool about AI, which in a lot of cases are more creative than what we adults are doing. But that's the other thing that's going to explode.
Right.
The biggest analogy that's going on that people cite in terms of programming and writing and all these things is, what do you think about using calculators in schools? Right? So that's really had the same kind of reaction. Some people say the fact that they're calculators means kids can do many, many more creative things with math.
Yes.
And the other thing that say the fact that they're calculators, kids will never learn this thing at all.
Yes.
And then there's, maybe kids don't have to. Maybe we don't have to do it. So you see that happening in schools. The other thing that I think is true is schools change slowly.
Yes.
So if you think about what I just said about calculators, the educational system is really not yet at the point where it's even taking the calculators that came out 10 years ago, and that's changed it. So when you say AI, I think that's the closest analogy that we have. So you can expect, so what can you say? You can say it's important to train teachers. It's important to give kids opportunities to be creative.
Yes.
It's important to think about what it is you want to be doing with this AI and what the kids are doing. And it's important to realize that this takes place over a long period of time.
Yes. Yes. That's a fantastic, analogy and explanation. And you brought in some of the operational considerations, training for teachers.
That's a major one.
Yes. And then evolutions of schools and the institutions that we have.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, what do you see as concerns for this technology going forward? Like, clearly we have some implications of plagiarism whenever this comes up. And I think that's where schools are a little bit worried about. So how do you think we can control and address this going forward?
Well, the concerns are that I'm not worried about plagiarism that much, because you can sort of deal with that. There's sort of standard, hey, there's plagiarism and do stuff. What's going on is kids and everyone start relying on these things that make a lot of errors. And if you think about, I'm going to write an essay or something. Let's think about just writing. There's lots of things. Well, I'm going to write an essay thing, and I'm going to go to one of these large language models to give me advice on what to write. Really good, or to help me do things. Well, maybe 10% of the time that information is just flat out wrong.
Right. Yes.
So what happens in the long run is kids and people stop worrying that things are just wrong. And we as a society and as an educational system lose this idea that the stuff we're doing should be true. So that's a long-range concern about what's happening. It's, that to me is sort of the biggest risk of using the AI things. Although, of course, people talk about other things like plagiarism and bias and all that. But the fact is, we just lose the idea that we should be doing, we just lose the idea of truth in our educational system.
Right.
So that I think is the long-range concern that's going on here.
That's a wonderful point you bring up, giving out wrong information, hallucinations.
Right.
And there are tools out there that are trying to address this. Like, for example, Perplexity has these references searches. It's not perfect, but it's a step.
There's a tremendous amount of research. Yeah, Perplexity is a great place that's doing. Anthropic is really thinking about that. Google's thinking about that.
Right.
But still, what's the best advice? Even these places say. They're saying if you do something and you query a large language model and you're going to publish it or something, well, it's your responsibility as the user to make sure it's true.
Right.
And that's, what's the implications of that?
Right.
Because that's, a pretty hard thing to do sometimes.
Yes.
And, it's not as if, there's a lot of stuff about people making deep fakes and all of that. And that's all true, that it's easy to do that kind of generating false information. But what I'm saying is, suppose it becomes so much more tedious to worry that what you're producing is true, that we start devaluing the idea that the stuff is true.
Right. And so far we've talked about the role of the use of AI as an interface, the use of AI as a source of information, the use of AI, since we brought in Perplexity, as a co-pilot.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing a lot of attention given to AI as agents, these models doing specialized tasks.
Yes.
And there is a thought process on the industry thinking that as we move towards artificial general intelligence, agents are like a bridge to get us there. What is your opinion on how this industry is maturing? Do you think the current architectures are going to get us there, or are we going to see something completely different on that path?
Oh, I don't know. There are all sorts of prophets, both in the industry and academic, who basically saying you need a fundamental breakthrough of doing things in a different way before you. And then there are other people who sort of say this word AGI, right? It's just a myth, a nonsense in any of this. What can you say that's really true? Well, one of the things is that the current systems are really pretty bad at reflecting human values.
Yes.
So there's both in research and in publishing, saying if you want to be making one of these things, you have to somehow involve humans in this. And then sometimes they say, as part of evaluating responses, you have to, what's called RLHF, responsive learning based on human feedback.
Yes.
That's one technology way. And then there's another place that's kind of coming out of the EU, which says you shouldn't use the results of this thing in a way that has an impact on people without having people involved in that decision, independent of how the AI did it.
Right.
So that's a response to, I think, to a big lack that's happening now. Whether or not there'll be this wonderful breakthrough where these large language models can reflect human models, I don't know.
Right.
Certainly a lot of people working on it. I don't think anyone knows. And there are just many, many strong opinions about that.
Right. Well, that's a fantastic picture you've painted. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Abelson.
Oh, sure.
Really appreciated this conversation.
An exciting time, and thanks for the
We're living
question.
a fantastic time.
Okay.